I married my partner without her knowing that I wasn't exactly who she thought I was. It all began 7.5 years ago, on a rainy October afternoon in Barcelona. I had just stepped off the train at Sant Station, dragging a battered suitcase that held the few remnants of my old life. Some clothes, an old laptop, a handful of well-worn books, and a passport bearing a name I no longer used. The humid city air hit me like a welcome slap, a stark contrast to the dry, dusty atmosphere of Castilla I had left behind. I wandered the cobblestone streets aimlessly, trying to orient myself with a crumpled map pulled from my pocket. My plan was simple: vanish into the anonymity of a big city, reinvent myself, and forget the shadows chasing me. I settled into a cheap hostel in El Raval, a noisy, multicultural neighborhood where no one asked too many questions. The first few days were spent exploring, buying essentials at local markets: an inflatable mattress, cheap kitchen utensils, and a prepaid phone. In the hostel bathroom, I dyed my hair from light brown to jet black, making me look more Mediterranean, and let a scruffy beard grow to soften my angular features. My real name was Adrián Vega, a 28-year-old investigative journalist born in a forgotten village in Toledo, where summers dragged on forever and winters bit hard. I had grown up among olive groves and vineyards, dreaming of becoming a writer, but ended up in investigative journalism in Madrid, working for an independent newspaper that specialized in exposing scandals. My downfall had been swift and brutal. It started with a series of articles on corruption in Madrid's City Hall, rigged tenders, bribes to officials, shell companies pocketing millions in public contracts. I was the one digging through archives, meeting anonymous sources in underground parking lots, cross-referencing data until the early hours. My pieces caused uproar, forced resignations, budding judicial investigations. But they also made enemies. First came threatening emails, then midnight calls with distorted voices. "Stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, Vega, or you'll regret it." I ignored the warnings, thinking it was part of the job. Until one night, coming home, I found my car engulfed in flames in the garage. The police labeled it vandalism, but I knew better. 2 days later, my editor called me into his office. "Adrián, take a long vacation. For your own good, and ours." I got the message. I was on my own. I decided to run. I deleted my social media profiles, closed bank accounts, and created a new identity with forged documents provided by a shady contact in the journalism underworld. Lucas Fernandez, 29 years old, born in Madrid, freelance graphic designer. A clean past, no complications. I moved to Barcelona because it was far enough away and cosmopolitan enough to get lost in the crowd. I found temporary work at a print shop, learning design software like Illustrator and Photoshop on the fly. It wasn't my passion, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. It was during that first week that I met her. I ducked into a tiny cafe in Gracia called El Rincón del Poda to escape the pouring rain. The place was cozy, with walls lined with shelves of old books, worn wooden tables, and the aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with vanilla. Only one table by the window was free, and there she was, Clara Ruiz, 27 years old, studying Hispanic philology at the University of Barcelona and working part-time at an independent bookstore called Letras Errantes. She had wavy brown hair tied up in an improvised bun with a pencil, thin-rimmed glasses sliding down her freckled nose, and an open book of Pablo Neruda's poems on the table. Her tea had gone cold and forgotten while she scribbled notes in the margins with a fountain pen. I sat at the next table, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out my laptop to pretend I was working on a design. But fate, or my clumsiness, intervened. Reaching for the sugar, I knocked my coffee over and spilled it across her book. The brown liquid spread like an accusing stain over the yellowed pages. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I stammered, jumping up and handing her napkins. "I'm a walking disaster." She looked up, blinked in surprise, then let out a soft, musical laugh that completely disarmed me. "It's fine," she said, carefully blotting the book. "Neruda has survived worse. Besides, now it has a coffee touch. Are you new around here? Your accent isn't Catalan." I told her my fabricated story, that I'd come from Madrid, fleeing a possessive ex who had broken my heart, looking for a fresh start in Barcelona. She nodded sympathetically, and the conversation flowed as if we'd known each other forever. She told me about her love for Latin American literature, how she dreamed of writing her own novel one day, and her solitary walks through the Horta labyrinth where she found inspiration. I talked about my passion for design, how I loved capturing emotions in images, and mentioned that Radiohead was my favorite band because their lyrics spoke of isolation and redemption, something that, ironically, echoed my real situation. We left the cafe together when the rain stopped. We walked through Gracia's narrow streets, past squares filled with street performers and crowded terraces. We exchanged numbers, and that night I got her first text. Thanks for the accidental coffee. There's a poetry reading at the bookstore tomorrow. Coming. That's how it all began. Our first official date was that reading, a local poet reciting verses about love and loss in a candlelit basement. Clara sat beside me, her knee brushing mine, and afterward we went for tapas at a nearby bar. We talked until closing time. Favorite books? She adored Garcia Marquez. I pretended Cortázar was mine to impress her. Movies? We both agreed Amelie was a gem. Dreams? She wanted to travel to Machu Picchu. I made up that I dreamed of designing covers for bestsellers. The following months were a whirlwind of discovery. We strolled through Park Güell at sunset, admiring Gaudí's mosaics as the sky turned orange and purple. She taught me to cook paella in her tiny student apartment, laughing when I burned the rice the first time. I took her to underground concerts at venues like Sala Apollo, where we danced until we were soaked in sweat, and to street art exhibitions at the MACBA. We built routines, Sunday picnics in La Ciudadela with cheese, cheap wine, and philosophical debates. She defended Nietzsche. I sided with Camus, though my knowledge was superficial. But beneath that idyllic surface, I battled my demons. Every time she asked about my family, I invented details: retired parents in Madrid, a married sister with 2 kids. In reality, my parents had died in a car accident when I was 20, and I had no siblings. I was terrified that one day she'd Google my name and find holes in my story. Several nights I woke up sweating, dreaming of imaginary pursuers. I tried to rationalize it. Months had passed with no signs of danger. Maybe they'd forgotten me. But fear was a constant companion, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. After a year together, we rented an apartment in San Antonio. A small attic with high ceilings, hydraulic mosaic floors, and a tiny terrace where we planted aromatic herbs. Clara moved out of her student flat and brought her books, which invaded the shelves like a welcome plague. We adopted Neruda, a black stray cat with yellow eyes that curled up in my lap as if he knew my secrets. Our life was domestic and happy. We cooked together, binge-watched Netflix series. She loved The Crown. I preferred thrillers like Mindhunter, made love with the passion of the early days. I found stability in my career as a designer. I started freelancing for small businesses, creating logos and flyers. I learned fast and soon earned enough to cover rent and occasional dinners out. But every time I saw news about corruption in Spain, I felt a pang of nostalgia for my true calling. I wanted to tell Clara everything about Adrián, about the articles that had changed lives and nearly ended mine. 1,000 times I almost did. One night, after a romantic dinner, I looked into her eyes and opened my mouth, but she kissed me first, and the moment vanished. 3 more years passed. We talked about the future, a trip to Italy, maybe kids in a few years, a house with a garden on the outskirts. Clara finished her master's and got promoted at the bookstore, organizing literary events that drew local authors. I joined designer meetups, feigning enthusiasm for graphic trends. Our relationship was solid, but undermined by my secret. Small lies piled up, excuses for not introducing non-existent family, evasions about my past job. The proposal day was unforgettable. It was November, a gray but mild day. We were walking along Barceloneta Beach, the Mediterranean lapping at the sand, seagulls crying overhead. Clara suddenly stopped, pulled a small box from her jeans jacket pocket, and knelt with a nervous smile. "Lucas Fernandez," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You've been my companion, my friend, my lover. You've made me laugh on dark days and dream on bright nights. Will you marry me and keep writing this story together?" Tears came before I could process it. I said yes, hugged her, and we kissed in the salty wind. The ring was simple, silver with a blue stone reminiscent of the sea. We planned the wedding excitedly. An intimate ceremony at a mansion near Girona, 30 guests including her friends and mine, 2 old university classmates who played along out of loyalty. She chose a vintage lace wedding dress from a secondhand shop in the Gothic Quarter. I picked a navy blue suit that made me feel like an elegant imposter. We invited her parents, a retired couple from Valencia who adored me, and her siblings. For my guests, I made excuses about why my family couldn't come, health issues. The wedding was magical. We arrived at the Mesa in a rented car decorated with wildflowers. Spring sunlight filtered through centuries-old olive trees, and the air smelled of lavender and damp earth. Clara walked down the aisle with her father, radiant, her veil flowing like a flag of peace. I waited at the altar, heart pounding like a drum. The vows were emotional. She promised to love you in words and silences, in books read and yet to be written. I, voice breaking, said, I promise to care for you, inspire you, and always be honest. The lie burned in my throat. The reception was a party, tables laden with Iberian ham, Manchego cheese, Catalan wines. We danced to a local band playing Beatles covers and flamenco fusion. Her parents hugged me, calling me son. My friends gave improvised toasts about my life in Madrid. That night, in the Mesa's suite, we made love with new intensity, as if the commitment sealed something eternal. Our honeymoon in Sicily was a dream. We flew to Palermo, rented an old Fiat, and toured the island. Taormina with its Greek ruins, the smoking Etna we climbed on a guided tour. She screamed with excitement seeing the lava, black sand beaches in Cefalu where we swam naked at dawn. We ate arancini, cannoli, and fresh pasta in family trattorias. In a white hillside house overlooking the volcano, we spent entire days in bed, talking plans. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, she said. And a dog for Neruda, I added. But one night, while she slept, I opened my old email out of morbid curiosity. The subjectless message froze my blood. Congratulations on your marriage, Adrián. Enjoy it while it lasts. Anonymous sender. I closed the laptop, trembling, and curled up against Clara, pretending everything was fine. Back in Barcelona, the paranoia grew. I noticed details. A man in a hat following me on the metro, a black car parked outside our building for hours, silent calls to the landline. I tried to ignore it, but stress seeped in. Silly arguments with Clara over nothing, sleepless nights. She noticed, asked, Are you okay, love? You seem distant. I smiled and deflected. Just work piling up. 3 months later, the collapse. Clara came home early from work, face pale. She pulled out the brown envelope. Photos of me as Adrián, old press clippings, the note. Ask your husband who he really is. The confrontation was long and painful. Sitting on the sofa, with Neruda purring oblivious to the drama, I told her everything. From my childhood in Toledo, entering journalism, the explosive articles, the threats, the fire, the escape. Tears streamed down my face as I described how the lie had become a prison. She listened, first in shock, then in anger. 7 years, Lucas, or Adrián, she said, voice breaking. All this time pretending? Our wedding a farce. I tried to explain. Fear of losing her, of putting her in danger. She stood up, locked herself in the bedroom. I spent the night on the sofa, hearing her sobs. The following days were limbo. She avoided eye contact. We ate in silence. I tried to apologize with gestures, flowers, cooked dinners, love notes. But the gap was deep. A week later, another note slipped under the door. Time's running out. Tell her the truth, or I will. I showed it to her, and that night we finally talked for real. I'm scared, I admitted. Of me? Or of them, she asked. Of losing you because of them. She sighed, took my hand. We're going to the police. Together. As Adrián and Clara, we contacted the authorities, detailed statements, an open investigation. We learned the corrupt officials had fallen, some in prison, others fled. The real danger was minimal, amplified only by my paranoia. We moved to a new apartment in Poblenou with better security. I legally reclaimed my identity, an endless bureaucratic process involving lawyers and judges. Reconciliation was gradual. Couples therapy twice a week, sessions unpacking betrayal and forgiveness. Heated arguments about trust, nights apart in hotels. But also reconnection moments, an impromptu trip to the Pyrenees, hiking snowy trails, and talking about rebirth. Clara read my old articles, impressed. You're brave, Adrián. But stupid for not telling me. 3 years later, we're stronger. We have Lucia, our 2-year-old daughter with brown curls and curious eyes like her mother's. We adopted a golden retriever named Gaudi, who plays with Neruda in our new garden. I returned to journalism, but gently. Cultural columns in a local paper, book reviews, artist interviews. Clara opened Letras y Sueños, her bookstore cafe in Pobl SEC. A hit with monthly readings and organic coffee. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she whispers, "The great liar who won me over twice." And I reply, "The truth saved us. And you saved me." I married my partner without her knowing who I really was. But now she knows everything. And she still chooses to stay. Every single day,